The acrid reek of burnt promethium hung heavy in the air as the Imperial forces mustered, a metallic stench clinging to Gavroy's nostrils. He squinted through the swirling dust at the alien landscape of Acreage, a rusted crimson wasteland under a perpetually blood-red sky. A fitting backdrop for the coming conflict, he thought grimly. "Sergeant Gavroy, my goodman, good morning to you and yours," came the crisp voice of a smiling Captain Theodoric, his shiny and huge power sword glinting in the dying sun. Theodoric was the epitome of Volpone nobility. His aquiline features were etched with a disdain that bordered on contempt. "Report, if you would be so kind." Gavroy stood up and saluted, doing the Aquila, the movement stiff in his worn armor. "Second Company, 74th Volpone, yours to command. All units ready for deployment, sir." His voice held a practiced neutrality, masking the annoyance that gnawed at him. This wasn't just another patrol. This was a full-blown Blood Pact incursion, and the 74th Volpone shared the battlefield with, well, less refined company. A rumbling echoed across the barren plains, drawing Gavroy's gaze. A hulking chimera lumbered into view, its metal hide adorned with crude glyphs and the reeking insignia of the Savlar Chem-Dogs. Atop it, a band of feral-looking men in mismatched armor whooped and jeered, their eyes gleaming with a manic fervor. The chimera lurched to a halt in front of the Volpone lines. A hulking brute with a chem-scarred face and a cybernetic jaw stepped out. "Sergeant Malik," he barked as he eyed the Volpone's shiny new advanced equipment and gear, the words barely audible through the respirator strapped to his face. "Chem-Dogs, reporting for duty." Gavroy suppressed a grimace. The Chem-Dogs were notorious for their brutal, often reckless tactics, the antithesis of the Volpone's controlled aggression. Yet, here they were, forced to share the battlefield. Then came the cavalry, gleaming Vitrian Dragoons whose crimson armor was polished to a mirror sheen, rode in on their massive Lehman Russes. Their leader, a young woman with a steely glint in her blue eyes, dismounted with practiced ease. "Captain Artaya," she announced, her voice laced with a hint of Vitrian haughtiness. "Dragoons are at your disposal." Theodoric inclined his head, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. The Dragoons were renowned for their lightning-fast attacks, but their reliance on open ground often left them vulnerable. "Excellent," Theodoric said, his voice dripping with forced civility. "Now, down to brass tacks. According to intelligence, there is a Blood Pact stronghold nestled within the Crimson Cleft. We need a plan." A heated debate ensued. The Dragoons favored a bold, frontal assault, while Malak of the Chem-Dogs advocated for a chemical bombardment. Gavroy listened patiently, his own regiment's arrogance grating on him. They were there, squabbling over tactics while the enemy tightened their grip. "Enough!" Gavroy finally interjected, his voice breaking through the cacophony. All eyes turned towards him, surprise flicking across their faces. A lowly sergeant daring to speak. Preposterous. "Look," Gavroy continued, ignoring Captain Theodoric's bristling, "we need a combined effort. The Dragoons can soften them up, but they'll still need cover. The Chem-Dogs have the ability to lay down a smoke barrage, masking their advance. We, the Volpone, will hold the line and mop up any stragglers." A tense silence followed. Captain Artaya studied him for a moment, and then a begrudging smile touched her lips. "Not a bad plan, Sergeant." Malik snorted, but offered no rebuttal. Theodoric, after a moment's consideration, cleared his throat. "Very good, Sergeant. Bold strategy, but one with merit. We move at dawn." As the sun dipped below the blood-red horizon, casting long shadows across the wasteland, a grudging sense of uncertainty began to simmer amongst the disparate forces. They were far from friends, these motley warriors, but for now, their shared enemy forged a fragile bond. Gavroy glanced across the battlefield. The Chem-Dogs were setting up their dispensers, the thick smoke mingling with the crimson sky. He caught Captain Artaya's gaze and saw a flicker of respect in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. Perhaps, despite all the challenges, the haughty Volpone, the wild Chem-Dogs, and the agile Dragoons could unite in their fight. The first tendrils of dawn painted the sky a sickly grey as the combined force lumbered towards the crimson cleft. The air crackled with nervous anticipation, the silence broken only by the rhythmic clang of the volcano's lasguns and the low rumble of the Dragoon mounts. Gavroy kept an eye out for Malek's Chem-Dogs. The hulking brutes moved with chaotic energy, their weapons spitting plumes of noxious fumes. He winced as a stray cloud drifted towards the volcano lines, forcing them to activate their respirator filters. "Respirators, men! If you didn't have them on, put it now!" Gavroy bellowed, his voice straining through the crackling Vox unit. He stole a glance at Captain Theodoric, expecting the usual disdain, but saw instead a flicker of appreciation. Perhaps even the captain understood the necessity of working together in this chaotic dance of war. As they approached the cleft, the Blood Pact forces emerged from the swirling smoke. Chaos warped the bodies of the cultists, charging them with feral abandon. Behind them, towering chaos spawn lumbered forward, their mutated forms spewing forth unholy ichor. Captain Artaya gave a sharp order on the Vox. "It's time! Move in tandem now, go!" A signal pre-arranged during the tense planning session. The Dragoons surged forward, their Lehman Russ's tanks thundering across the wasteland. Their cannons, hot with heat and power, tore through the enemy ranks, leaving trails of sparking metal and smouldering flesh in their wake. But the Blood Pact wouldn't yield so easily. Cultists, in hordes coming out of the smoke, swarmed the Dragoons, armor, their makeshift weapons glinting in the sickly dawn light. The writhing mass caught one Dragoon off guard near a tank, dragging him and devouring him. Gavroy slammed his fist against the Voxcom button. "Chem-Dogs, lay down the smoke!" A moment later, a thick, acrid cloud billowed forth from the Chem-Dog lines, obscuring the battlefield. Visibility dropped to mere meters, turning the fight into a chaotic melee. This negated the Dragoons' tanks' advantage of open ground. Well, that would have been the case if the advantage of the armor wasn't already lost a second before, kicking off the second part of the plan. From the back hatches of the Lehman Russes, entire companies of Dragoons dismounted with heavy lasguns on max potency. The trap had been set. Gavroy gritted his teeth. This didn't go exactly according to plan, but it could work. He barked orders, leading his company into the fray. "Pick your targets, my good men and ladies. All squads forward. Move and shoot. Take the field. Advance." In the thick smoke, the controlled volleys of lasgun fire that were the hallmark of Volpone tactics were useless. The fight devolved into a brutal brawl of man-to-man combat, filled with the clang of metal and the desperate screams shooting and injured. Through the haze, Gavroy saw a monstrous chaos spawn bearing down on Captain Artaya, now dragged out of her tank. Its mutated limbs lashed out, one blow shattering the captain's helmet. Yet Artaya stood her ground, her eyes blazing with anger as she parried a killing blow with her glowing power sword. Without hesitation, Gavroy surged forward, his las pistol spitting hot death. The swan roared in fury, its attention was momentarily diverted. Artaya seized the opportunity, her power sword flashing in a deadly arc, severing a monstrous tentacle. The spawn screeched, turning its focus back to Gavroy. He braced himself for the impact, but a gout of green, sickly fire erupted from behind the creature. Malek and his Chem-Dogs had arrived, their flamers spewing forth a torrent of burning chemicals that melted the spawn's flesh. The battle raged on for what felt like an eternity. The smoke thinned slowly, revealing a battlefield littered with the dead and dying on both sides. The Volpone, Dragoons, and Chem-Dogs, battered and bruised, stood panting amidst the carnage. Slowly, a cheer rose from the Volpone ranks, hesitant at first, then growing in volume. The Dragoons and the Chem-Dogs joined in, their sounds echoing through the desolate plains. "Sir, the men say Overwatch Command. From orbit signal, the heretics have retreated and are trying to run from the planet," a quite happy Volpone trooper informed Gavroy. They had won against all odds and confusion. Gavroy looked around at the weary faces of his comrades, a newfound respect burning in his eyes. They had done it. Throne shine, I did it too. These were not just Volpones, untamed Chem-Dogs, or swift Dragoons anymore. They were survivors, bonded by the crucible of war. Captain Theodoric, with a bandage over his head, He took a lot of damage as he was the first to charge, approached him, his face grim, but his voice surprisingly devoid of its usual haughtiness. "Well done, Sergeant. First I will let it pass our little impasse on the strategic planning meeting. You fought well. All men are saying this, honored tradition. We will see about your promotion, and when we get back, send your best to your family from mine." Gavroy felt pride, quickly dampened by the grim reality of the battlefield. "We all did, sir. My deep apologies for before. I was out of line and insubordinate," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Now, sir, if you please, we have to save and patch up our good men and ladies. Let's get these wounded back to the Chimera." As the sun climbed higher in the blood-red sky, casting its harsh light on the aftermath of the battle, Gavroy knew this was just the beginning. No one could easily deter the Blood Pact, but for now, they had stood together, a testament to the unlikely alliances forged in the fires of war. The Volpone, the Dragoons, and the Chem-Dogs were a group of misfits, yet they understood the true significance of victory.